Vint Cerf is an American internet pioneer and is known as one of the fathers of the internet, sharing his title with the TCP and IP code developer Bob Kahn. Since 2005, he has served as Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist for Google. He is the founder and former chairman of the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, or ICANN, and served as the founding president of the Internet Society from 1992 to 1995. He is a recipient of the ACM Alan M. Turing Award, and in 2005 was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President George Bush. Vint, thank you so much for joining us here today. It is a pleasure to be hosting you. I wanted to start off by talking about your childhood. You were at high school when you worked for Rocketdyne on the Apollo program and helped write statistical analysis software for the non-destructive tests of the F1 engines. You're now widely known as one of the fathers of the internet. How did your teenage years and your upbringing influence your future path? And had you always planned it out to some extent?
Well, I didn't anticipate necessarily working in rocketry or anything like that, and my career really hasn't been focused on that. But I knew very early on that I was going to be a scientist of some kind. I was good at mathematics. I enjoyed reading books like The Microbe Hunters by Paul de Kruif and The Boy Scientist. I forget the author of that. George Gamov's 1, 2, 3 Infinity. I mean, I can even remember the book titles of these things. I remember doing algebra when I was still in 5th grade because I got bored with 5th grade arithmetic. And I think when I was in high school, I took calculus classes at UCLA. My high school was in the San Fernando Valley. The reason I bring this up is that I can recall vividly walking past one of the engineering buildings at UCLA, and this would have been about 1961, having this overwhelming feeling that I would be back on that campus at some point in the future, possibly doing work in nuclear engineering. And I was back on the campus in 1967, 6 years later, not doing nuclear engineering, but doing essentially a PhD in computer science and working on networking. So there was something that bound me to that campus. And since that time, of course, my career and its entire trajectory has been associated with computer communications and networking. And it's, of course, been wonderful to watch how much you can fold into that particular rubric. For me, it's gone everywhere from terrestrial computer networking to interplanetary networking and beyond.
So you mentioned UCLA. You've studied at numerous universities around the USA, such as UCLA and Stanford, and have received kind of numerous prestigious awards along the way. How did you see the nature of scholarship as differing between the institutions that you studied at?
I think probably the most important element of my education had to do with freedom to try things out. In the case at UCLA in particular, Len Kleinrock, in whose lab I worked, the network measurement lab, basically gave us free rein to figure out how to get the computers to connect to the ARPANET and do something useful. And so he didn't lay this down and say, do this, 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 and this. His focus of attention was largely on the modeling of the computer network and then predicting how it should behave. And part of our job was, my job anyway, at the network measurement lab, was to run tests against the network, generate artificial traffic, make predictions from queuing theory models, and then see whether or not the network behaved as predicted. So this freedom to explore was tremendous. And the same kind of thing happened when I joined the faculty at Stanford University. I had enormous latitude. Thankfully, I also had support from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which conferred that latitude. But once again, DARPA did not say, do this, 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 and this, and this. They said, basically, this is the capability we're trying to reach in a rather, I would say, unspecific way. And they gave us this enormous opportunity to just explore the solution space. So it's freedom to explore, freedom to fail, that has informed my entire career. I've been very, very lucky to have jobs that permit that degree of latitude.
You've done a lot of incredibly admirable work as an advocate for accessibility in different areas. Could you tell us a bit about how your advocacy has influenced your career and the guiding principles you hold yourself to?
I think the biggest thing that drives me more than anything is actually doing something. I mean, I'm an engineer. I love problems. By the way, if the secret to getting useful work out of engineers is to present them with a problem. Hi, I don't know how to do this. Can you make it work? And engineers love that. And so for me, it's the endless source of problems arising that have informed my career more than anything else. The other thing, which has been very much a part of my world, is that I was born with a hearing impairment, which wasn't very apparent at birth, but it got noticeable as I got older. So by the time I was 13, I started wearing hearing aids. And so I gravitated towards projects that involved text communication as opposed to voice communication, because that voice communication was harder. Then I met my wife, who was totally deaf because she'd lost her hearing when she was 3. And neither of us had ever learned to sign, but eventually she ended up with a cochlear implant. Now she has 2. And so technology has enabled us to survive and function in a hearing world. And that simply reinforced my belief that technology can be a powerful enabler and leveler. And so another part of my world has always been looking for technologies that overcome disability and level the playing field.
How do you see this relationship between technology and overcoming disability featuring in a world post-COVID-19 and during the pandemic as well?
Well, it's pretty clear that during the pandemic, a largely preferred modus of operandi has been to isolate people from each other and from the rest of the world. And so we, along with lots of other people, have been living at home, shopping infrequently, not going to parties, not having dinner parties, and making very heavy use of computer communications as we are right now. And so if anything marks the COVID-19 situation, it is the need to physically isolate from each other, to resist the proximity which we normally enjoy and normally make use of when we're working. So this proximity problem has really posed a big challenge for us. And we've made heavy use of the internet and its capability in order to overcome that particular barrier. My guess is that although it has not been perfect, and that I'm sure if you've used a bunch of video conferencing tools, you've had various and sundry challenges arise. And certainly in the K through 12 space, a lot of teachers who were not accustomed to teaching through this medium were challenged. And families at home were challenged if their internet service wasn't adequate, or if they didn't have all the right computing capability, or didn't know how to help the kids get online. So this has not been a smooth process by any means. But I think over a period of several months now, several things are becoming apparent, one of which is that it is possible for some people to work from home. It is even possible that for some people, working from home is more efficient than going to work. And I would include myself in that category, partly because I have room in the house. We're in my basement office right now, looking at the only neat part of the office, which is the ego wall behind me. The rest of the office you're not seeing because the camera is not pointing in that direction. But for me, my job involved 80% travel. So I was away on the road three weeks out of 4 every month. I've not traveled in 3 months. My commute is a few seconds up and down the stairs from the first floor to the basement. And I've been able to interact with people all over the world. So I had a talk with some people in India yesterday, and today I met with people in the UK and with people around the United States and in Germany. And I mean, it is distance, let's say, insensitive. It's not time zone insensitive, though, which is a big issue. For some people, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and it's very hard to have these interactions. But I would say, overwhelmingly speaking, that the internet has held up well, and that it will probably influence the way in which business is conducted after the COVID-19 is over. One other point to be made is that I noticed that medical treatment has really transformed because doctors were refusing to let me or my wife visit them face to face in the office, whereas the normal thing was, I'm not feeling well, I will go see the doctor. They didn't want to be infected with COVID-19. They didn't have protective gear. They didn't have test equipment or test reagents and things like that. And so remote consultation became the norm for a lot of medical interventions. And of course, I was irate about this because I'm sitting here saying, well, wait a minute, you didn't take my temperature or my blood pressure or my pulse rate, or you have no data about my bodily condition. And they said yes, but we don't want to get infected. So I'm thinking that one consequence of this COVID-19 is a potential focus of attention on the Internet of medical things, not just the Internet of things, but medical things, sensors that can help with diagnosis. And I am pretty convinced at this point that not only will COVID-19 have pushed us towards that necessity, but it opens up a really interesting opportunity for improving remote healthcare. And so one of the outcomes of COVID-19 may very well be much improved healthcare for many people who otherwise wouldn't be able to get to the doctor in the first place.
How do you kind of reconcile remote healthcare models with kind of the data concerns and the privacy concerns that come along with them?
Well, there's several issues that are mixed together here, and so let me try to disarticulate them. It's pretty clear that people would prefer not to have their medical information shared widely. Although, let me give you a scenario which I certainly resonate with. Let's imagine that you're in a city you've never been in before, and you have a serious medical incident. Maybe you've had a heart attack, or you've broken an arm or a leg, or some other thing has happened, or you've contracted COVID-19, and you are in the hospital in the emergency room. At that very point, the last thing in the world you would be worried about is inhibiting access to your medical record. Your first reaction is, I want them to know everything they could possibly know so they can help me get over whatever this problem is. Now, of course, if you survive, then the next thing that comes to mind is, well, I know I wanted them to have access to everything while they were treating me, but now that the treatment is over and I'm out of the emergency room, I don't want the fact that they treated me to give them continued access to my medical information. So that's one kind of scenario that we have to design for. The second scenario is the one where we're trying to understand what the state of health is of our country or a region, a city, or a state or something. And we don't need to know about individuals, but we need to know about the aggregate. And so we have to find ways of anonymizing the information, allowing us to understand aggregate statistics about the state of health of our population. We need this for policy making, but we also could use this for diagnosis, for looking for correlations, looking to see what conditions imply other conditions, like susceptibility to COVID-19, for example. So our ability to anonymize and use aggregate data could turn out to be very important from the standpoint of improving healthcare. And so I, as a technologist, feel very challenged by trying to balance all of those desiderata. But I also feel like those are exactly the right challenges to drive us towards solutions. And I'm back to my engineering philosophy, which is, I have a problem. Isn't that wonderful? Now I get to dig my teeth into it.
You've written various pieces on the role that the internet has played and how it can permit meaningful remote interaction, as you just said, while also conceding that the internet is not uniformly accessible or implemented, and that exists kind of various social divisions along rural, urban lines and so on in the internet. Do you think that the existence of the internet, and how do you respond to the argument that the existence of internet further separates groups across the world insofar as those who have access to it and those who don't? Or would you say this is indicative of kind of a broader social inequality that we first have to overcome?
Well, first of all, of course, it would be my desire that anyone who wishes to have access to the internet can get access to it in an affordable way. And that, by the way, affordable is a very important metric. Another one is in a reliable way. Another is a safe way. It's not necessarily safe on the internet. We have scammers, we have denial of service attacks, we have malware attacks, we have phishing attacks. There are a variety of situations that you can encounter on the internet that are potentially hazardous. So I would like to make the internet safer for everybody. And in order to achieve that objective, we have to look at ways to stimulate investment in the infrastructure that's needed in order to support the basic internet and the World Wide Web that sits on top of it. And that will require clever and fairly deep policy analysis in different parts of the world, depending on local conditions. So in some cases, for example, pure competition and policies that encourage competition in the commercial sector may be enough to stimulate increased amount of available access to the internet. It is true, however, that in the rural parts of any country, it's more expensive to deliver high-speed internet service than it is in an urban or suburban setting. And so in order to overcome that barrier, we may need to adopt policies where the federal government underwrites some of the cost. In the US, for example, the Telecommunications Act provides for something called the Universal Service Fund. It was originally intended to subsidize the cost of telephone communication in the rural parts of the country, but could easily be adapted to providing broadband internet and to subsidize the costs, which would otherwise be out of reach for a lot of people. Another possibility is that the government chooses to build part of the infrastructure and then make it available on a wholesale basis to retailers. You can even do that in the private sector. Google built an optical fiber network in Kampala, Uganda, and then sold at wholesale access to that network for retailers to resell to the consumers and to businesses in Uganda. And that worked out sufficiently well that we actually formed a joint venture with a couple of companies in Uganda to offer that service. I think we did the same thing in Accra in Ghana. So that's yet another example of a formulation that encouraged not only competition and choice for the consumers, but also an investment in the underlying infrastructure. I've been spending a lot of time working on trying to get internet access for Native American populations in the US, and that's a big challenge because they're very remote. The social and economic conditions are very limited in terms of available disposable income. But that situation arises in lots of parts of the world. And so we have to take all those things into account as we think our way through solutions. But as you know, I'm an optimist. I see Elon Musk and his 22,000 satellites in low Earth orbit as one potential solution to the problem. I'm even seeing some very interesting free space lasers as an alternative to the middle mile underland, fiber. It could be a lot cheaper to put up a laser shot. Although, of course, if you have precipitation, the signal may be, I would say, this may be less effective in terms of data rate than on a nice clear day. Nonetheless, it looks like there are lots of alternatives to implementing these technologies and driving cost out and improving, I would say, redundancy so that the system becomes more resilient.
Turning now to the subject of automation, the increased kind of automation in our lives, especially in the workplace, has sparked so many fears across workers and economies. Where do you see automation coming in, especially in a world after the pandemic, and the benefits and pitfalls an automatic world can present to us?
So as you are well aware, of course, automation has been with us for a long time. It might not be artificial intelligence, and it may not even be computer driven, but when you think about the Industrial Revolution, that was all about making things mechanical that had been done, manually. And lots of jobs went away, lots of new jobs were created, people learning how to run machines, how to build machines, how to service machines. That same cycle is going to be with us with computer-based automation. Somebody still has to design the tools, somebody has to maintain them, somebody has to learn how to use them. And so we will need new skills. And the big issue associated with computer-based automation is the possibility that the people whose jobs have just been automated are not trained to do the jobs that are new and that require new skills. And so one of the things that we need to revisit is how to provide opportunity for those new skills to be learned so that people can continue to work. Let me take an example of 3D printing just as a hobby horse here. It inverts the way in which manufacturing is done. Normally, we bring resources to a place. Possibly, we bring sub-assemblies from other places, and then we assemble everything. Or we ship raw materials to a place, and then we build things out of that. In the 3D printing space, you get the raw materials out to the edges. You deliver designs through the net, and then the 3D printer goes and builds something. And we may see a fair amount of that happen for small production runs, like you need a spare part of some kind. They put a 3D printer on the International Space Station precisely for that reason, to allow for certain kinds of parts to be made up there that would otherwise cost tens of millions of dollars to get up there by rocket. Now, you still have to deliver the raw materials, but once the raw materials are in place, you could design and make these devices simply by transmitting the instructions. So bits are cheaper than atoms in that particular case. So I am sympathetic to people whose jobs may evaporate as a result of automation, but I am a proponent of training people to do new jobs and thereby provide them with new livelihoods.
Turning now to our final question from Adam at St. Edmund Hall, and he asks, for several years now, you have been raising concerns about the wide-ranging risks of digital obsolescence and the potential of losing much historic information about our time, the digital dark age or black hole, given the ubiquitous digital storage of text, data, images, music, and more. What work has been done in the technological community, and do you think that the risks of digital obsolescence have increased over time?
So I continue to perseverate on this. I'm very concerned because even though the cloud computing environment leaves you, and the current World Wide Web leaves you with the feeling that everything is there and it will be there forever, when you look for something and you find it again, it feels like it's in permanent storage, except for the day when you search for something and you get 404 page not found. And at that point, you realize that not everything on the web is necessarily there forever. So I am still engaged in looking for technologies for long-term preservation. I can tell you that one thing which is turning out to be very important is virtual machines that can be used to emulate older hardware, that can run old operating systems, that can run old applications, and interpret old files, whether it's a spreadsheet or a video game or a text document or something else. The ability to run old stuff may turn out to be very important. And a number of places that care about that, like the British Library and the archives and things like that, are already investing in some capabilities. Even my own company is looking at virtual machines as a very important raw material for preserving digital content over long periods of time. So the problem is much more visible now than it ever was. The search for business models to do that preservation over 100 or 200 years is very much at the forefront of understanding how to achieve the objective, which is not to lose our history. I still worry that the 22nd century may scratch his head about the 21st century, wondering what was it like then, because the digital trail may very well have gone cold.
That is all we have time for today, Vint. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.